Well, Nicole, two can play at that game. I have a confession to make. I am a massive lesbian stereotype, and this definitely isn't my only flannel shirt. But not only is it comfortable, it has a lesbian legacy. Comfortable lesbian legacy. If you are very online, or if you're trying to be less online, but about half a dozen people have tagged you in a certain video, you may have come across lesbian lumberjack, Nicole Quinnan. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Nicole, if you're watching the video, let me know. Also, you're awesome. I also like your axe refurbishing videos. Nicole knows what she's doing, okay? And I mean, a strong lesbian lumberjack chopping wood in the forest. What's not to love? Except that she has now become even more powerful and has caused even more of a gay panic through the acquisition of a sword. Bask in,
okay.
the gay panic.
I am so excited for this. Well, let's get this open.
I'm so excited for you, Nicole.
Oh golly. I have a sword. This is a wood splitting sword. Well, let's give it a
sword.
test.
Look at her go! Look at her go!
All of my childhood dreams
all of my
have just come true.
Just come true, Nicole. Sword-wielding lesbian lumberjack. Well, Nicole, two can play at that game. No, I'm not challenging Nicole to a duel. Let's find out why I'm so gay. Let's find out exactly where the love of lesbian lumberjacks comes from, what weapons a lumberjack lady could wield, and whether there's any historical truths behind a sword-wielding lesbian lumberjack.
Let's go, lesbians, let's go!
I would be tempted to say that every lesbian one day finds a flannel shirt in her closet and must make the decision of whether or not to uphold this sacred clothing tradition or find her own style. But just like me, this manifestation of blatant lesbianism seems at first sight to have emerged in the 90s, with the arrival of grunge fashion perpetuated by rock bands like Nirvana, thus allowing a legion of confused baby lesbians to steal this comfortable staple from their brother's wardrobe and never give it back. Désolé. And its soft woven fabric of flannel isn't just unbelievably comfortable and practical and just looks amazing on any lesbian. It was, and still is, the uniform of choice for the lumberjack. The lumberjack as a word was first used in 1831 in Canada, in a phrase where they are referred to as an incorrigible, though perhaps useful, race of mortals, which same. And they certainly were useful, as wherever there were vast expanses of forests and a need for wood, there they were. Focusing on an American context specifically for our purposes, our lesbian purposes, many lumberjacks came originally from Scandinavia and perpetuated the family tradition once they're settled in North America. And while in the United States originating mainly in Maine, they were part of a westward migration which led to many of them settling in the upper Midwest. And some of that history and how they are written about and often romanticized cemented them as part of classic American imagery and just this image of overt, rugged, outdoorsy masculinity. Because although the lumberjill also existed, the main image of the lumberjack remains one of overt maleness due to the seemingly male-only nature of the logging camps that they were part of that would end up disappearing by the 60s. But no typical lumberjack is complete without their weaponry, their tree weaponry, which leads to the trusty axe.
And my axe.
By the time our American lumberjacks rolled around, there were a lot of different types that you could use, like the felling axe, used to cut across grain of the wood, and that can be single bit or double bit, one choppy side or two choppy sides. Sword lesbian there. And its bit, which is the edge, Polaxi boy here, Princess Peach, who's going to demonstrate, which, you know, is this bit, the edge. This is rubber, by the way. Princess Peach here does not have her staff yet, so she's a bit flippy-floppy. Princess Peach, do you think it's sad that there isn't enough poleaxe-wielding girl representation in media? But you also have splitting axes, unsurprisingly used by lumberjacks in wood splitting, which is to say splitting the wood fibres apart without cutting through them, which is a distinction I have learnt today. But for more precision work, you might want to go with a broad axe that could be used for hewing, which means converting a log into timber, or lumber, which means a bit of that axe will have one flat edge and one beveled edge, which is an edge at an oblique angle. For leveling out the wood, you'd more likely use your adze, and if you wanted to do more of a woodwork job, you'd use your smaller carpenter's axe. Not to be mistaken with the hatchet, which is a teeny tiny light axe you can use in one hand, and is good for camping and travelling, as well as driving out the Burgundians out of your village if you're a heroic medieval peasant during the hatchet, mentioned previously on this channel. But if you're tired of axes or swords, you could also just go to the mall. The splitting mall, that is. But surprise, it's also an axe. Just a heavier one, with a longer handle, and one side of it shaped like more of a sledgehammer. But Claire, you clamour, clutching your flannel and your axes. What does this all have to do with lesbianism? Well, it turns out everything. But we also need to look at this with a wider queer perspective. American westward migration was for many not just motivated by cutting wood, but for a need to reinvent themselves and seek out a freedom that they could not find elsewhere. Lesbian history naturally intersects with a wider queer history and specifically trans history. So it comes to no surprise that many people found in general pioneer life, but also in specifically the lumberjack life, an opportunity to not only embrace a better life, but also find new gender expression and gender identity. People like Sammy Williams, an 80-year-old lumberjack who, at his death in 1908, had lived his entire life as a trans man in a community who didn't know him under any other name, identity, or gender expression. But also queer and trans authors like Willa Cather, who expressed his masculine identity from an early age, but whose gender expression flourished in the Midwest, alongside his queer relationships and his novels documenting the pioneer experience. What we consider now as butch identity and gender expression has inherently emerged from queer and trans legacies around reclaiming masculinity. Just as American queer and trans people were trying to find authentic ways of living their life in Midwest and beyond, anti-cross-dressing laws popped up everywhere across the United States, such as an 1848 law from Ohio preventing people from dressing in public, I quote, in a dress not belonging to his or her sex. While this varied in leniency, other laws included a certain amount of gender-conforming clothing to wear unless you wanted to face arrest, which was referred to as a 3-article rule. The consequences could be very severe. Just as the period between World War II and the 60s saw a big change to the traditional lumberjack's way of life, butch lesbian culture of the 1450s, drawing on the gender nonconformity of their queer and trans ancestors, reclaimed and embraced the rugged masculine image that these lumberjacks projected, alongside other signifiers like the tuxedo, the military uniform, and even the sailor outfit. This reclaiming of the lumberjack look also no doubt provided a working class alternative to the more upper class lesbian fashion and coding that had been in vogue since the interwar, such as the monocle. And the rest is flannel clad history. But this all brings us back to our sword wielding lesbian lumberjack. So what we may have gathered from me saying axe way too many times in the video is that there is probably a more predictable and straightforward weapon for a lesbian lumberjack than a sword, and there is something quite poetic about the fact that the lesbian lumberjack's presumed weapon of choice features on the butch lesbian flag itself. The particular axe is specifically a labrise, and its original use was not destined for forestry, but it still is a double-headed axe, and I think that the parallels are somehow delightful. And you can find out more about the labrise in my video specifically devoted to it and how it became a lesbian symbol, and then you might as well subscribe if you watch that because, you know, you've made it this far down the lesbian axe-wielding rabbit hole. But is there any historical truth to the idea of a wood-splitting, tree-chopping sword? Well, I'm in danger. This apparently means wading into a subject of debate on SwordTube and swords academia, but my common sense stone to the edifice is that technically, I suppose, some historical swords could have, but it doesn't mean that their wielders should have. Just as agricultural and forestry tools could become combat weapons in a pinch, despite not being optimally designed for this purpose, it's not impossible. I guess it kind of depends on whether or not you want your sword to survive that ordeal, or shatter as easily as whatever Link has had the misfortune of using for more than 3 times in Breath of the Wild. The sword Nicole is wielding is designed by Viking Woodsplitter, whose whole thing is a wood splitter shaped like a sword to, quote, split firewood like a Viking. I'm not going to go into the claims of the founder that they are safer than axes or any kind of metrics around efficiency because it's not in my area of expertise at all. The contemporary swords I specialise in collecting, like lovely Owen here, are specifically meant to be as blunt as possible because they're used for historical European martial arts. I'm after the bluntest boys on the market. What I can provide somewhat is historical commentary. So when it comes to the Viking bit in this sales pitch, is there any evidence of Vikings historically using a sword as a wood splitter, or indeed a wood splitter shaped like a sword, which is more so what this product is? No. This being said, are there far more pressing matters to attend to when it comes to misconceptions around Viking history and culture, reclaimed by white supremacy and toxic masculinity movements, than a novelty wood-splitting item crafted by a Canadian small business, which doesn't seem to foster anything other than inclusivity in its online presence? Yes, it is an interesting addition to the idea of Viking imagery and how it is perceived today. This idea of let's chop wood like a real Viking, but at the same time that there's nothing on their website that has any toxic mention of this being a manly man thing to do, and seem to be pretty inclusive in their general marketing. It is inaccurate, but it's not going to keep me up at night. But let's wrap this up in our metaphorical flannel, or physical flannel if you're wearing it while watching this video, which admittedly would be pretty funny. We may find fun and gay panic in the use of long-lasting lesbian tropes like plaid patterned flannel and the wielding of swords. But even if butch icons reclaiming masculinity across the LGBTQI spectrum and sword-wielding ladies have always existed, we don't need to justify their historical presence at every turn to explain why we are drawn to these symbols. What they symbolize is not only the reclaiming of a wider narrative of personal power and expression, it's also a wider collective history that could not always be written, that exists in the in-betweens of the conspiratorial look that older butch lesbian will give baby gay, and handing them their first flannel and giving them butch lesbian fashion tips. And I've been there, you know who you are. Or the wonder of wielding a longsword and suddenly feeling more power than the world has ever told you you could wield, and using that power to rally to your queer and trans siblings. Or indeed, the collective dreamy sigh of the internet admiring a strong lesbian lumberjack fulfilling her childhood dream by splitting a log in two with her sword. That's all for today. Please, out of interest, data collection, please let me know if you own a flannel shirt, regardless of your allegiance within or beyond the LGBTQI spectrum. And also remember to subscribe for more weird gender shenanigan sword videos. Erwin compels you to, so you know, you don't want to upset Erwin, do you? Stay safe, sword lovers and lesbian lumberjack lovers, and see you in another video. You know, I feel like Claire's just exploiting me for views and subscriptions, and it's really sad. Maybe I should start my own channel. Laughing with longswords? Yeah, it's work in progress.